Hey guys, tonight we are slipping quietly into the silken, embroidered, and faintly perfumed world of Ottoman sleepwear, where bedtime wasn't just a matter of curling up under a blanket, but a matter of etiquette, status, and surprisingly high thread counts. You might think pajamas are a modern indulgence, but in the Ottoman Empire, what you wore to bed said almost as much about you as what you wore to court. Picture this: the low, golden light of an Anatolian morning peeking through a latticework window. A breeze lifts the edge of a curtain stitched with tiny tulips. You're lying on a thick mattress placed on a raised wooden platform. No stiff beds here, just layers of plush bedding and soft cotton sheets, cool to the touch. You stretch, yawn gracefully, of course, and reach for your morning robe. It's not just any robe, it's a striped silk wrap with indigo embroidery, hand-dyed and trimmed with stitching so fine you'd need to squint to see it. Your pajamas, if we can call them that, are technically a set of loose-fitting shalvar trousers and a long, belted tunic called an intari. They're tailored to allow movement while sleeping, but refined enough to receive visitors at breakfast should the occasion demand. And yes, sometimes breakfast happens before you change, especially if your guest brings coffee and mildly scandalous gossip. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know where you're listening from tonight and what time you've hit play. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your day begins the way most days did for well-off citizens in Ottoman cities like Istanbul, Bursa, or Edirne, with light filtering into the room through linen shades, the smell of cardamom from someone making tea next door, and the soft rustle of fabric as you slide out of your sleeping layers. You fold your bedding methodically. It's not laziness that leaves mattresses on the floor. It's style. And tuck your blanket and coverlet into a cedar-lined chest. The chest is important. Not only does it keep moths out, it also signals to your household that you take pajama care seriously, that you're the sort of person who doesn't mix linen sleepwear with wool robes, that you respect the unspoken textile hierarchy. There's no such thing as just sleeping clothes here. Ottoman pajamas are deeply considered. The sleeves of your top might be slit up to the elbow, not just for movement, but to show off layered undersleeves in a contrasting color. The trousers gather at the ankles, not for modesty alone, but because it's considered good form, both aesthetically and for warmth. Historians still argue whether pajama etiquette in the Ottoman Empire was a reflection of inner spiritual balance or simply good old-fashioned class signaling. Either way, one thing is clear: if you wore pajamas that clashed, someone would talk about it quietly over quince jam and bread, but they would talk. As you dress for the day, you consider which robe to pair with your ensemble. Do you go with the bold stripes that match your slippers, or the solid cream with piping so subtle it whispers rather than shouts? There is, believe it or not, a strategy here. Ottoman layering wasn't just about temperature control, it was about the reveal. The idea that someone might glimpse a peak of deep purple beneath navy blue and know, instantly, that you were not to be underestimated, or worse, under-accessorized. And don't forget the sash, always the sash, wrapped around your waist, and knotted with enough flair to suggest you woke up like this. Even if you spent 5 minutes in front of the mirror, trying to decide if the tassels should sit to the left or right. Meanwhile, in another room of your home, the household's younger children are waking, possibly grumbling, possibly thrilled, depending on whether there's helva for breakfast. Their pajamas are lighter soft cotton with tiny patterned prints, maybe stars, maybe floral motifs, and yes, sometimes a miniature fez just for bedtime. It's adorable. It's excessive. It's very Ottoman. You're not the only one observing the pajama code. Across the city, people are waking up in a spectrum of styles. A merchant in Galata ties on his embroidered sleep robe, muttering something about trade tariffs and cold feet. A scholar in Edirne smooths out the creases in his favorite sleep tunic, wondering if it's too early for plum tea and existential dread. A concubine in the palace lounges beneath a canopy of gauze, stretching her toes while attendants discuss which slippers best complement yesterday's dreams. Even the servants have rules. Pajamas must be modest, practical, and clean. And the steward, who polices pajama cleanliness, feared more than any bureaucrat. By the time you finally step outside into the courtyard garden to sip your first cup of tea, piping hot, brewed with sage and a dash of rose water, you realize you've spent nearly an hour in sleepwear, and no one would judge you for spending the next hour in it, too. Because here, in the Ottoman Empire, cozy isn't lazy. It's elevated. One final note. If you ever stay the night in a friend's home, be aware. Your pajamas will be noticed. The cut, the weave, the drape. These things matter. Choose wisely, or at least bring coffee as a distraction. You're still in your courtyard, warm cup in hand, robe, fluttering gently in the morning air. When the neighbor peeks over the wall, not to gossip yet, but to see what you're wearing, he nods approvingly. Your pajama set is doing its job. In the Ottoman world, pajamas weren't just about comfort. They were a walking resume, a sleepy, cotton-stitched declaration of taste, status, and very likely how your week was going. Because when your tunic's embroidery is 2 fingers deep in gold thread, you're either doing quite well or overcompensating for last month's lost shipment of figs. This morning, your look says respectable, approachable, possibly makes good lentil soup. And that's exactly what you're going for. As you move back inside, you pass a mirror. Just a polished bit of copper, really, warped from age, and catch your reflection. Loose sleeves swaying, slippers intact, sash holding its ground. It's easy to forget how much language is wrapped into fabric. But here, even a fray at the hem can suggest financial distress. Or worse, a tailor you haven't tipped well enough. You sit at the low breakfast table, which has already been laid with olives, dates, cheese, flatbread, and just enough honey to feel luxurious without slipping into dessert territory. You reach across to pour another cup of tea and pause. Your sleeve brushes the surface of the table. Scandal. You tuck it up discreetly, remembering too late that breakfast attire etiquette includes watching your sleeves, lest they dip into the jam and mark you as someone with poor self-management. Historians still argue whether these customs were genuinely enforced or just passive-aggressively judged. Either way, the message is clear. Your pajamas reflect your character, at least until the second cup of tea. Across the city, fabric tells similar stories. A wealthy merchant's son, freshly returned from a textile buying trip to Persia, lounges in a midnight blue set of pajamas sewn with thread so fine it could be mistaken for hair. Not that you're supposed to know that. Of course, he's casually mentioning it to everyone who will listen. Meanwhile, a craftsman in Üsküdar wears a set passed down from his father, patched lovingly, worn to softness, each stitch holding a small generational sigh. His sash isn't silk, it's cotton, dyed a bit unevenly, but it's tidy. It's tied right, and it tells the world, I respect myself, and I didn't overspend on buttons. Then there are the truly elite, the palace pajamas. In the Topkapi Palace, the Sultan's sleepwear is a matter of state concern. Rich brocades for winter, breathable muslin for summer, every garment overseen by the kumashnazire, or fabric inspector, who has more opinions about bedtime thread count than most people have about politics. Some say the Sultan owned over 1,000 pieces of sleepwear, which sounds extravagant until you remember that each robe had a seasonal function, symbolic purpose, or political meaning. There's a difference between the evening reflection robe and the post-moonlit conference sash. Don't mix them up. Or do, if you like living dangerously in silk. And of course, the pajamas had to be comfortable. Even emperors need soft things, but not too soft. Too soft, and you're accused of indulgence. Too stiff, and someone whispers that you've lost touch with the people. Pajamas walked a fine line between luxury and humility. Meanwhile, you're finishing your bread and honey, absently brushing crumbs off your robe, when you realize that you've left your sash slightly askew, a small, traitorous loop in the knot. Now, you're not under direct observation from a palace tailor, but there's still pride at stake. You stand, retie it with care, this time aligning the tassels just so, and check again in the mirror. Yes, that's better. Now you look like someone who reads poetry at dusk and might own a pomegranate orchard, which is, frankly, the dream. There's something calming in this ritual, in the small gestures of presentation, in folding comfort around you, like a message you send without speaking. You could change now, slide into your day robes, head out to the bazaar, but the light hasn't turned harsh yet. The pigeons are still preening on the rooftop, and honestly, the world can wait. So you settle back down on the cushion, refill your tea, and let your pajama sleeve drape gracefully across your lap, making peace with the fact that today you're a little more striped than you meant to be, but perfectly dignified nonetheless. You finally make your way to the chest at the foot of your bedding platform, the one that creaks just a little when you open it, as if sighing from years of holding secrets in fabric. Inside lies your collection, not riches, not scrolls, not heirlooms in the traditional sense. Though some might argue a particularly well-preserved linen intari is more valuable than a dozen antique spoons. No, this chest is a treasure trove of textures, cotton, silk, muslin, and blends with names so delicate they sound like lullabies. You run your fingers across them, noting which sets need patching, which need laundering, and which deserve a dramatic reintroduction now that spring is tiptoeing across the rooftops. Tonight calls for something light. You lift a pale cream set with faint tulip embroidery, along the cuffs barely visible unless you're paying attention, which, of course, is the point. Back in the Ottoman heyday, fabric was more than fabric. It was a proclamation. Cotton from Egypt, silk from Bursa, and sometimes an experimental blend imported through Venice that made you itch and impress guests in equal measure. You were your textiles. Historians still argue whether thread count or dye origin mattered more to Ottoman aristocrats. But one thing is clear. Pajama feuds were real. A merchant family in Damascus reportedly refused to attend a wedding after spotting their unique indigo-dyed motif copied imperfectly. Might we add on another guest's night tunic? Scandalous. You think back to your own fabric misstep. That winter, when you ordered wool-lined shalvar from an overconfident young tailor. The result, itchy thighs and the sound of threads protesting at every step. You wore them once, then swore an oath under the moonlight to never again sacrifice comfort for novelty. Even today, walking through the bazaar, you hear murmurs about a new shipment of brushed cotton arriving from India. Brushed, the sellers speak of it like a miracle, and honestly, they're not far off. Ottoman textile culture, prize sensation, how a fabric felt against skin, how it moved in lamplight, how it held the scent of rosewater after an evening bath. You pull another set from the chest. This one's older, a little faded. The cuffs frayed in that lovingly worn way that says, I've survived long conversations, rainy afternoons, and possibly that one night of questionable lentil stew. It's impossible to throw away. Sleepwear doesn't just carry thread, it carries history. And like all good history, it's stitched with debate. Take muslin, for instance. Some praised it as the perfect breathable fabric for Ottoman summers. Others found it too fragile, prone to tearing during sleep wrestling, which was more common than you'd think, particularly in shared quarters with enthusiastic dreamers. Silk, unquestionably luxurious, but also slippery. There are palace records, well, jokes disguised as records about court servants falling down marble steps while wearing overly polished silk robes. One entry simply reads, slid into the vizier's lampstand, required both apology and stitches. Still, no matter the fabric, the rule was the same. Sleepwear had to function and flatter, no exceptions. You remember an old friend Nuri who swore by flannel, imported, of course, and frowned upon by traditionalists. He'd stand on the rooftop in his red-checked ensemble, arms outstretched like a man basking in the freedom of not caring what the court thought. Of course, he also once tried to make pajama trousers with built-in pockets, which failed spectacularly and resulted in a public wardrobe malfunction involving a lost almond bun. But you admired his spirit. Ottoman textile law was no joke. Tailors had to adhere to strict guidelines depending on the customer's social class. Certain dyes were off limits. Certain thread weights were reserved for the elite. If a fisherman showed up in golden-stitched lounging robes, someone would whisper. If a scribe wore plain brown linen every day, someone else would whisper louder. And whispering, in the Ottoman Empire, was practically a national sport. Still, enforcement wasn't always harsh. More often, it was about quiet correction. A merchant might receive a gift of more breathable sleep trousers from a friend, folded neatly and placed conspicuously at his doorstep. An aunt might send a cousin a length of proper silk, followed by a note that read simply, "You'll know why." That's how pajamas police themselves. Which brings you to your most treasured piece, a set of deep blue chalver and tunic, lined with light fleece, embroidered with a pattern you've never seen anywhere else. They were your grandmother's. She once claimed she dreamed more clearly while wearing them, that the fabric guided her gently through the night. You never believed that. Exactly. But every time you wear them, your dreams do feel steadier. And yes, you only wear them on quiet nights, when the wind is low, when you've lit the sandalwood candle, when you want to feel swaddled, not just in cotton, but in memory. Tonight, you'll wear the tulip set, but you refold the others carefully, as if they might wrinkle your dreams. If handled carelessly, you close the chest with a soft thud and feel a tiny puff of lavender-scented air escape from between the layers. You look at your reflection once more, now bathed in golden twilight. You are dressed for rest. You are draped in softness and history. And you know without a doubt that tonight you will sleep like a noble. Or, at the very least, like someone with excellent taste in bedtime threads. You light a small lamp as dusk settles outside, the kind with a gently flickering flame that makes everything look like a miniature oil painting. Your tunic sways softly as you move about the room, checking little things you've checked 1,000 times. That the window shutter is closed just enough to let air in, not bugs. That your sleeping cushion is still plump where it counts. And that your tea tray has all the essentials: glass cup, sugar cube, tiny spoon, quiet sigh. Your pajamas, by now, have become a part of you. The fabric breathes with your movements. The tulip embroidery catches the lamp's glow just so. But what really makes you pause, As you lower yourself onto the cushion with a relieved oof is the detail stitched into the cuffs, not just decorative. No, this pattern is a message. See, Ottoman embroidery wasn't merely aesthetic, it was a language, a way to speak when speech would be too bold, or impolite, or boring. And nowhere was this truer than on pajamas. Tonight, you're wearing tulips, but not just any tulips. You notice they're slightly curved to the left, with 3 tiny dots stitched above each blossom. A symbol of elegance, yes, but also a polite request for peace. These cuffs say, I'm not taking visitors. In other words, the sleepwear equivalent of do not disturb. You smile, remembering the first time you learned that cuffs had etiquette. You were visiting a distant cousin, a textile snob of the highest degree who spent 20 minutes judging your ensemble before pausing, squinting, and muttering. You're signaling retreat tonight. You had no idea. Historians still argue whether such pajama symbols were universally understood or simply a hobby of bored noblewomen and tailors with too much thread. But evidence from harem journals and court documents suggests that embroidery was a kind of polite code, especially in palace circles. For example, stars stitched into hems. You're seeking inspiration. Cypress trees along the collar, mourning, but subtle. Tiny birds near the ankle. You're open to romantic attention, but only if they bring sweets. The more detailed the embroidery, the more layered the meaning. Some women would spend weeks planning their night tunic design for a seasonal gathering, commissioning tailors like poets. Every motif a syllable. Men had their codes too, though admittedly more restrained. One official famously wore a plain set of pajamas with only a single stitched line along the hem. That line, a miniature wave pattern. Translation: I am tired of your drama and need a night off. You glance down again at your tulips, feeling oddly powerful. Your robe, too, is saying something. The double-cuffed sleeve, lined with a muted green piping. It suggests patience, that you're in no hurry. That tonight is for quiet thought and warm drinks, not loud conversation or intense board games. Even your slippers have something to say. Leather, soft-soled, with faint embroidery at the tip, a stylized almond blossom, the symbol for gentle beginnings. You wear them, not because you expect company, but because they ground you, and because your feet are cold. This pajama poetry, of course, was not without its critics. A few cranky scholars in the early 18th century wrote essays with titles like Against the Overstimulation of Nighttime Attire and Why Slumber Should Not Involve Symbolic Birds. Their arguments boiled down to the belief that sleepwear should be simple, silent, practical. They were ignored because, frankly, it's hard to take someone seriously when they're wearing unadorned beige linen in a city where even the coffee pots have flair. The elite and the fashion-forward middle class continued their embroidered rebellion. Tailors competed to invent new motifs. One stitched a dragonfly perched atop a teacup, another a pomegranate bursting with gold thread. Some designs became household signatures, passed down through generations, replicated like family crests. Even servants got in on the trend. They might not have had silk or jewel tones, but they embroidered tiny initials or symbols on the inside hem. Quiet acts of self-expression in an empire that didn't always see them. There's one story of a young servant in a large Kanya household who stitched a single thread of bright orange into her uniform pajamas. Just one, at the left hip seam. Her employer never noticed, but every time she dressed for bed, she'd touch that thread and smile. A secret, a spark. You sip your tea. Let your fingers trace the edge of your cuff. So much of Ottoman life was lived in layers, architectural, emotional, textile, A palace might contain hundreds of rooms, most of which no one ever visited. People spoke in poetry, even when ordering desserts. And pajamas. Pajamas, whispered. They said, I am gentle tonight. They said, I need to grieve quietly. They said, I dream of boats and wild herbs. Your own set, tonight, speaks volumes. It says, leave me in peace, but wish me well. It says, I've chosen comfort, deliberately, and with flair. It says, I know what tulips mean. The lamp flickers again. A breeze stirs your sleeve. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a dog barks once and gives up. You finish your tea and fold your hands into your lap. There's nothing left to say, because your pajamas already said it all. The hour grows later, and with it comes a hush that feels thicker than silence. It's the kind of quiet that settles over a city with tiled roofs, stone courtyards, and centuries of bedtime rituals. You stand at the edge of your sleeping chamber, taking one final look at the soft folds of your bedding, the lamp glowing like a sleepy eye, and the reflection of your embroidered tulips flickering faintly in a bronze tray. Tonight, you sleep alone, but not unobserved, because just beyond the walls of your home lies one of the most carefully choreographed nighttime ecosystems in the empire, the harem quarters. Not the scandalous harem of Western fantasy, but the lived, deeply complex, and often surprisingly bureaucratic female community that defined much of the Ottoman domestic world. In this world, sleep wasn't just rest, it was political. You can almost picture it. A sea of embroidered robes gliding silently across polished marble floors, bare feet on woven carpets, the scent of sandalwood and jasmine lingering like an unspoken opinion. Girls in pale pajamas whispering stories as they braid one another's hair, giggling into sleeves, adjusting sashes with the practiced precision of someone who knows how not to be noticed. Their sleepwear. Oh, it mattered. Light muslin for younger girls, gauzy and floaty, like a daydream. Heavier silk sets for the senior ladies, those with influence, rank, or particularly sharp opinions about herbal tea blends. Sashes were color-coded. Embroidery denoted favor. One concubine's sleeve might boast a delicate rose motif stitched in gold, a subtle reminder that she'd once been gifted perfume by the Sultan himself. Historians still argue whether specific pajama styles conferred rank or if they were just the byproduct of generational taste. But the consistent presence of ornate nightwear in harem inventories suggests this wasn't just fashion, it was structure. It was diplomacy with fringe. And oh, the drama of bedtime. You'd think sleep would be a solitary, quiet affair. Not here. Imagine 20 women, each with their own corner of a communal chamber, each lighting her own lamp, brushing her own hair, and trying gently, but firmly, to establish who gets the corner near the good window. One woman adjusts her slippers 5 times, not because they need it, but to make a point. Another casually mentions that her aunt once stitched robes for the Sultan's aunt's cat. A third applies rose oil to her wrists and pretends not to see the others watching. There are whispered debates about bedding thickness. There are arguments over which scent calms dreams best. There are rumors that one of the senior women has a secret stash of candied ginger, used only on nights when sleep seems just out of reach. And through it all, the pajamas flutter like banners, like emblems. Because in the harem, nothing is neutral, not even the stitching on your sleep tunic. Still, it's not all silent power struggles and competitive folding. There's also an extraordinary tenderness here, a sense of routine that transcends rivalry. One girl helps another tighten the sash of her robe. A woman braids her friend's hair while humming a lullaby too old to trace. An older matron smooths a sleeping child's blanket, tucking it just so you remember, dimly, your own visit to a household where the harem ladies hosted a guest night. You were just a cousin, hardly worth notice, and yet there it was, a cushion laid out, a steaming bowl of tamarind water, a borrowed set of pajamas folded neatly beside your bedding, the cuffs lined with silver thread. You'd never slept more soundly in your life. Even now, as you lie back onto your own mattress and let the layers settle around you, you find yourself borrowing from those old rituals. A little rose oil on the temples, a gentle pat to your pillow, folded inward like a secret. The same three-breath rhythm someone taught you years ago, said to quiet the mind and guide it toward pleasant dreams. Outside your window, a night breeze rustles the leaves. Somewhere far off, a muezzin's call lingers from the last prayer, echoing gently across rooftops. In the palace harem, the lights have dimmed. The silk robes are folded, the sashes laid out for mourning. The walls hum with stories, stitched into seams and whispered in dreams. And here, in your own modest chamber, you too are part of that legacy. You, in your carefully chosen tulip tunic. You, in your well-tied sash and slightly too proud slippers. You, breathing in the quiet like it's a bedtime story. You, carrying on the tradition of turning rest into ritual sleep, into softness, night, into something embroidered. You wake briefly in the middle of the night, not with alarm, but with that quiet awareness that the world has shifted slightly in its sleep. A breeze dances across your cheek. The lamp has gone out, or perhaps was never lit in the first place. The moon casts a silver shimmer across the fabric of your sleeve, illuminating the gentle folds of your pajamas like a silk-draped hillscape. And then you remember your nightcap. Yes, the humble yet wildly underestimated Ottoman nightcap. You reach over to the small cedar box near your cushion and retrieve it. A soft, lightweight piece of headwear, sometimes tasseled, sometimes embroidered, but always a source of intense personal preference. Your own is made from brushed cotton, dyed a subtle maroon, with a single stitched tulip near the edge. A sleepy nod to your cuffs. Naturally, you settle it over your hair with practiced ease, not too tight. You don't want the dreaded forehead crease in the morning, not too loose, lest it slip off mid-dream and leave you vulnerable to both chills and aesthetic disorder. Historians still argue whether the nightcap served primarily as warmth, hair protection, or modesty. The truth, as with many Ottoman things, is probably yes. It was all of those and more. In polite society, removing one's headwear was a meaningful gesture, even in private settings. But sleep was a transitional state, one foot in the world of appearances, the other in the world of dreams. So, the nightcap allowed you to rest without fully surrendering the dignity of being properly attired, a sort of sartorial wink to the universe. Yes, I am asleep, but I am also, very respectfully, fabulous. Nightcaps weren't just for the bedroom, either. You remember stories of scholars who wore their sleep caps into the study for late-night reading, of poets who claimed inspiration only came when their heads were swaddled in soft linen. One famously grumpy historian once dictated a letter entirely in rhyme while wearing what he referred to as the cap of clarity. The results were mixed. Even in the harem, nightcaps had flair. Some were stitched with little charms, tiny gold beads, or symbolic buttons, thought to invite good dreams or ward off the sleep demons that supposedly lingered around doorways. One concubine, known only as Aishi of the lilac robes, was rumored to sleep with a nightcap stitched entirely with verses from a love poem. She claimed it gave her better dreams. It probably also gave her headaches, but no one questioned her style. There's something comforting about the gentle weight of fabric against your scalp as you settle back onto your pillow. It's like a soft hand, resting just above the brain, keeping your thoughts from drifting too far or too fast. Your breath evens out, your limbs settle into the bedding. But wait, not yet. Because next to the nightcap is a small vial of rose oil and a wooden comb, both part of your grooming ritual. Yes, even at bedtime, especially at bedtime, you uncork the bottle and dab a tiny bit behind each ear. Then run the comb through your hair, slow and deliberate, not for vanity, for stillness. This, you've been taught, prepares the mind for rest, the way a polished bowl prepares for tea. Grooming isn't about looking good, it's about being ready. Historians still argue whether grooming at night was spiritual, social, or just a way to avoid tangles. But Ottoman manuals on domestic etiquette often listed nighttime hygiene as essential to harmony, both personal and household. You recall a tiny pamphlet once shown to you by a traveling bookseller titled The Ordered Pillow, Proper Conduct in the Hours of Rest. It contained an entire chapter on pre-sleep cleansing, which included combing the hair, rinsing the mouth with clove water, and whispering thanks to one's mattress for supporting the body. You didn't adopt every step, but you liked the spirit of it. Tonight, after the oil and the comb, you also wipe your feet with a cloth dampened with mint water. It's cool, refreshing, a signal to your body that the day has ended. Nearby, your slippers rest, side by side, toes pointing west. As custom dictates, you extinguish the lamp with a gentle puff, then pause. One more glance at your robe, now folded neatly on a stool. One more tug at your nightcap. One more deep breath of rose and cedar. You're not just going to sleep. You're making an exit from the stage of the waking world. You're doing so in costume and with grace. And should anyone peer through your window for any reason at all, they'd see not just a person at rest, but a person in quiet command of their comfort, dignity, and silk-forward nighttime routine. You lie back, you smile. Because in this empire, even dreaming is an art form, and you're dressed for the occasion. Morning, in the Ottoman Empire, begins not with a blaring alarm, but with the soft shuffle of slippers on tile, the clink of a copper kettle warming over coals, and the first whisper of call to prayer floating on the breeze. But for you, the day doesn't begin until you've selected the right robe to throw over your pajamas, because yes, you're stepping outside in your sleepwear, and no, that's not remotely unusual. It's entirely expected. You ease your door open and step out into the sleepy courtyard, where shadows from a trellis vine pattern the stone like calligraphy. The air is cool, just enough to warrant a robe, something mid-weight, nothing too flashy. You settle on your pale blue morning layer, the one with the soft velvet trim, and the one button that never seems to close quite right. It's your casual but competent robe, because today you'll be venturing onto Silk Street, and Silk Street doesn't care if you're tired, or even particularly awake. It cares only that you show up properly layered. You shuffle out into the morning light with a steady stride, your pajama trousers hidden beneath your robe's hem, your sash slightly loose, but still holding up its end of the bargain. You walk with the confidence of someone whose ensemble may be informal, but never indecent. Because Ottoman cities, in their finest form, understood something that the modern world often forgets. There's a difference between informal and sloppy, and the line between pajamas and daywear, oh, it's beautifully blurred. As you cross into the neighborhood's cobbled main street, shopkeepers lift their shutters and wave. Not one of them blinks at your attire. In fact, one compliments your tulip cuffs in passing. Another raises a cup of tea in solidarity. He's in his striped pajama tunic, paired with an overrobe so long it nearly sweeps the dust. On Silk Street, however, things get competitive. Merchants there wear pajamas on purpose, silken, draped, embroidered masterpieces paraded like sleepy peacocks across a tiled avenue. You pass a fabric seller whose robe is dyed in a shade of green, so luminous it almost shimmers in the morning light. He smirks at you, clearly noting your more modest hues. A baker ladles batter into copper pans while wearing what appears to be quilted brocade. You silently wonder how he doesn't melt into a puddle of sweat. But he grins as if to say, style over temperature. And then there's the poet. Oh, the poet. He's standing in front of a tea house, reciting half-memorized verses to no one in particular, wrapped in a flowing robe, with sleeves longer than necessary, and a sash tied so high it could double as a cravat. His pajama trousers peek out like a secret, ink-stained and proudly wrinkled. He holds a book in one hand and a dried fig in the other. He spots you and raises an eyebrow. You nod back, as one properly robed citizen to another. He continues, in sleep, the soul walks gardens deep. In robes of cotton, dreams it keeps. You make a mental note to never challenge a poet in pajamas. They always win. Historians still argue whether the tradition of wearing sleepwear in public was due to fashion fluidity or just the climate. After all, in a city where summers stretched lazily over months and breezes offered no loyalty, loose-fitting clothes made sense. Why change out of something breathable just to sweat in something stiff? But function wasn't the only reason. It was also about the theater of the casual. By stepping out in refined pajamas and an elegant robe, you projected an image. I am so at ease. I don't need to prove anything. I own 10 more sets like this. And yes, my slippers are coordinated. Of course, there were rules. Pajamas had to be clean, pressed, respectable. You could lounge, but you could not look unwashed. That was the line. An Ottoman society, as relaxed as it was in this domain, guarded that line like a palace gate. You duck into a stall to inspect new bolts of fabric, perhaps for your next set. The merchant, who is wearing a sky blue tunic with intricate cloud-like embroidery a bit on the nose, really leans in conspiratorially. This one's Egyptian cotton, almost too soft. He says, you nod. Impressed, you run your fingers along the edge of the fabric. It hums under your touch figuratively. Of course, you're not dreaming. Yet, the poet wanders past the stall, still mumbling rhymes. The baker yells something about sesame loaves. The robe merchant adjusts a mannequin in the window. Yes, even mannequins wear pajamas here. And you realize you've been standing in your sleepwear for nearly 2 hours, and no one minds. Least of all, you. There's a serenity to this space, between private and public, between dreams and dialogue, between your own front door and the tea house's shaded corner cushion, where someone will inevitably offer you strong black coffee and a plate of honey-soaked dates. You stroll toward that very cushion now, your robe swaying like a silk curtain in the breeze, your slippers tapping gently on the stones. You sit, you sip, you feel the warmth of the cup seep into your fingers. Your robe catches the light, just so. And once again, you are reminded, in the Ottoman Empire, even errands were an occasion, and pajamas, bless them, were always invited. By mid-morning, you're still comfortably curled up at the tea house, half listening to the low murmur of conversation as people pass in and out beneath the carved wooden awning. A breeze ruffles your robe. You adjust your sash just slightly, letting the hem fall gracefully across your lap. Because even in relaxation, there is dignity to maintain. The waiter brings your second glass of tea. He gives you a knowing look and nods at your ensemble. Good day for a tulip cuff, he says, and you nod sagely. There's a shared understanding here. Two sleepwear connoisseurs appreciating the unspoken art of soft rebellion. But now, your thoughts drift to the other end of the social ladder, the servants, workers, and apprentices who start their days long before sunrise, who live not in painted villas or cool-tiled palaces, but in modest quarters tucked above shops, behind kitchens, or in little alleys, where the scent of warm milk and charcoal hangs in the air like an old friend. Their pajamas, less embroidered, certainly less dramatic, but no less important. A stable boy might wear a plain cotton tunic and woolen trousers softened by years of washing. An older housemaid wraps herself in a faded robe with patched elbows and a lining she stitched herself. An apprentice tailor might wear his last botched commission slightly lopsided, but comfortable and very instructional. Historians still argue whether working-class Ottoman families had dedicated sleepwear or simply wore their least formal garments at night. But textile inventories from the era suggest that even the humblest homes valued nighttime comfort, perhaps not with silk and gold, but with warmth, layering, and a devotion to soft linings. You recall visiting a spice merchant once, whose young assistant proudly showed off his evening shirt. It had a tear at the shoulder and one sleeve longer than the other, but it was his, and stitched by his own hand. Made for dreaming, he'd said, with the kind of grin only a teenager can get away with. There was a charm to it. Because for all the luxury robes parading down Silk Street, the essence of Ottoman pajama culture wasn't exclusivity. It was intentionality. Whether you were a palace concubine or a dockside porter, the act of preparing for sleep changing into something, anything, a little softer was an act of self-respect, a pause between the grind of the day and the surrender to the night. You sip your tea slowly, thoughtfully. In the shaded corner, behind you, a group of seamstresses on break are eating simmet and chatting quietly. One of them is describing a dream. She had a garden filled with floating lamps. Her grandmother appearing in the doorway of a silk tent, offering her an endless robe stitched with stars. They all sigh a little. Then one leans in and says, "I tried to make pajamas like that once." Laughter, not mocking, nostalgic. It reminds you of the textile guilds, which trained tailors not just in technique but in meaning. The apprentice years included long hours of cutting, hemming, learning fabric weights, and draping methods, but also the symbology of patterns, knowing when stripes implied seriousness, when floral meant invitation, when block print was perfectly acceptable unless worn to a moonlit supper. Even servants of wealthy households were often gifted simple pajama sets at New Year's as a gesture of dignity and shared humanity. There was a belief floating quietly through the streets and mosques and kitchens that sleep was a sacred threshold. You crossed it wearing your intentions. And yes, it was very bad form to show up to a public bath in sleepwear. Even Ottoman freedom had limits. You finish your tea and stand, brushing non-existent crumbs from your robe, a gesture more ritual than necessity. Your slippers scuff softly on the stone. You begin to walk slowly past shops. Just now, getting noisy. Down one side street, a boy in rolled-up pajamas is feeding pigeons. On another, a woman with a basket over one arm adjusts her nightcap before turning into a bakery. No one's in a rush. Everyone's quietly dignified, as if the act of moving through the city wrapped in last night's comfort somehow shields them from today's chaos. It's not about laziness. It's about permission. Permission to be soft, to be transitional, to exist in the liminal space between waking and obligation. Back in your neighborhood, the sun is higher now. The shadows are smaller. The stone warmer beneath your feet. You turn the corner to your house, robe fluttering behind you like a sleepy banner. You pause before going inside, and you think of all the people in this empire, grand and humble, who greet the morning in folds of fabric that cradle memory, dignity, and dreams. You open the door. The cool air greets you, and inside, folded neatly on the stool by your bedding, is another pajama set. This one's for evening, but we'll get there soon enough. Back inside, you change slowly, reluctantly, even from your public-facing pajama ensemble into something a little more indoors appropriate. Not that anyone's knocking on your door to enforce a code, but there's a rhythm to these things. A robe for mornings, a robe for twilight, and in between, a midday set. Yes, midday pajamas were very much a thing. You reach into the smaller cedar drawer, the one that always sticks just slightly at the edge, and retrieve your soft cotton tunic. This one's unadorned, save for a little olive leaf pattern stitched along the lower hem. Quiet, unassuming. It says, "I may nap later." And truly, what could be more Ottoman than that? You change, fold the blue robe you wore outside, lay it on the bench in the corner with the quiet reverence of someone who understands what fabric can carry. Then you settle near the window, where a soft patch of light pools across the floor. Time for a bit of reading, maybe, or more likely, just watching the dust swirl in the sunlight like golden confetti. There's a comfort in that kind of nothing. In the Ottoman home, the midday was sacred, not for doing, but for being, and your pajamas, once again, are part of the ritual. You sit, maybe with a book of poetry, Rumi, if you're feeling spiritual, Baki can chase, if you're in the mood for love, or perhaps just a page of old recipes scribbled by your aunt in handwriting so elegant it might as well be carved into a palace wall. You read 2 lines, then stop, because truly, the fabric of your tunic is whispering, and nap. Historians still argue whether Ottomans napped daily out of custom or necessity. Some cite climate, others point to the pacing of religious observance. Still others think it's simply because people understood the value of letting the brain drift for 20 minutes in soft cotton while pigeons cooed outside. Whatever the reason, it was expected, and pajamas, of course, were involved. There's even mention in 17th century house manuals of ikindi kıyafeti afternoon attire. Not formal, not even semi-formal, just restful, breezy, usually cotton, sometimes with an inner lining that felt like a sigh. You imagine your cousin in Bursa, who once proudly told you that he had 7 pajama sets, one for each time of day. You thought he was joking. He was not. You remember visiting him once. He had a drawer marked Clouds, which contained nothing but pale-colored loungewear. Another drawer said Shadow, all darker tones. For introspection, apparently, you begin to understand him a little more now, because as you sit in your midday set, the difference in feeling is subtle but undeniable. It's lighter, shorter sleeves, roomier collar. It's not for guests. It's not for display. It's for breathing, deeply, with no judgment and no plans. And that's the secret to Ottoman leisure. Intention. Even doing nothing was done with care. You lie back, one arm over your eyes to shield the light, your pajama sleeve draped like a soft curtain. Somewhere, a neighbor waters their plants. A cat pads across the roof tiles. You consider the hour and realize it's exactly the right time for almost sleep. Not a full nap, not quite, but the dreamy, liminal pause where you don't fall asleep so much as float. You pull a thin blanket over your legs. You shift once, twice. Your tunic wrinkles slightly beneath you, and you don't care. You're not here to impress the cushions. You're here to be still. And as you drift only slightly, not fully gone, you imagine how many others across the city are doing the same. In stone homes with rose gardens, in seaside villas, in tiny attic rooms, above bakeries, people curled in corners of shade, wrapped in soft cotton, defended from the sharpness of the day by layers of pajama fabric, and a general agreement that naps are not laziness. They are art. You stir. The light has shifted again. You sit up, comb your fingers through your hair, and yawn. Just a little. A gentle reminder from your body that rest isn't always about unconsciousness. Sometimes it's about the moment right before where your limbs are heavy, your mind quiet, and your pajamas crumpled just enough to prove they were used properly. You rise slowly, stretch, adjust your sash, and make your way toward the kitchen, where you'll boil some water and sip a tea so weak it's practically emotional support. Because even in rest, you deserve a reward. And perhaps later this afternoon, you'll visit the laundry courtyard. Yes, time to air out the evening set. The sun is now lazily stretching its way down the sky, painting long golden stripes through your shutters. You've changed back into your soft slippers, the pair, with the embroidered heel that's just starting to fray. The familiar creak of the floorboards underfoot echoes like an old friend greeting you after a nap you didn't quite mean to take. It's laundry time. Yes, even Ottoman pajamas, no matter how ornate, layered, or politically symbolic, eventually need a good wash. And unlike today's world of anonymous machines and unscented detergents, Ottoman laundry had drama. You step into the small open-air courtyard behind your home, where a low marble basin catches the filtered sunlight. You bring a small stack of last week's sleepwear, folded carefully, but with an honest awareness that at least one of them still smells faintly of sesame oil and dreams. A pitcher of water waits beside the basin, warm just slightly by the day. You roll up your sleeves, cotton ones, this time, and begin the age-old ritual. Dip, scrub, rinse, repeat, but gently. With pajamas, always gently. As you work, you recall how laundry wasn't just a chore. In Ottoman households, it was practically a social occasion. In larger estates or family compounds, women would gather at the hammam or communal courtyard every week, arms full of linens and robes, buckets of rose water and lavender bark in tow. They'd chat, argue softly about the proper way to scrub silk, and compare whose night tunic had held up best under pressure. Historians still argue whether Ottoman laundry techniques preserved fabric better than their European counterparts. But considering how many centuries-old garments survive in museum collections, you wouldn't be surprised if the answer leaned toward yes, especially when one considers the variety of ingredients used: olive oil soap, lemon paste, pounded fig bark, even vinegar steeped with rosemary. Of course, some ingredients were less popular. You once tried a rinse of clove water and overboiled peach skins. Your robe smelled like a nervous dessert. Never again. You dip one of your older night tunics, woven linen, with a faded indigo stripe, and begin gently massaging the collar seam. It's satisfying, really. Like exfoliating memory, you imagine the stitchwork brightening again with every swirl of your palm. Nearby, a small breeze stirs the drying line you strung between two wooden pegs. One of your freshly laundered cuffs flaps gently, as if waving approval. And yes, your drying line is sorted by occasion. Left side, mid-weight cottons for everyday dreams. Middle, formal silk blends for guest nights and special weather. Far right, the rainy day, robe heavier, lined, worn during thunder. A neighbor once asked if you were overthinking your fabric rotation. You responded by inviting them to nap in a linen tunic on a stormy night and report back. They never questioned you again. You pin another pair of trousers to the line, marveling at the slight golden sheen left by the sun. Ottoman sleepwear, particularly cotton and silk blends, had a way of catching the light as if blushing. There's a joy in this process, not just in the clean clothes, but in the return to ritual, the quiet scraping of wet cloth against marble, the scent of soap laced with lavender, the way your fingers prune, but in a contented, fulfilled kind of way. You remember your grandmother again, how she insisted pajamas weren't clean until they'd dried in full sun and been folded while still warm. The sun folds them better, she said. You weren't sure what that meant at the time. Now, of course, you know, there's even a technique to folding, a sharp press along the sleeve line, an inward roll that protects embroidery. A final pat, a little farewell until next time. Ottoman tailors often included small tags, hidden on the inside hem, with folding instructions. It was considered part of the full pajama experience. You once found a note on one that simply read, "If this wrinkles, it's on you." You fold a freshly dried tunic now, smiling at its crisp form, and stack it gently beside the door. Your laundry is nearly done. You wring out your washcloth, wipe your hands on your robe. The sun has dipped lower, and soon the city will shift gears. Candles will be lit, tea will change from reviving to relaxing, and the evening pajama sets will start to make their way out of drawers and closets like actors taking the stage. You glance down at the tunic you're still wearing soft, damp at the cuffs from rinsing. It served its purpose. Now it's time to elevate the attire. Evening robes await, but first, a little snack, maybe almonds and dried apricots, something to mark the transition from linen scrubbing daylight to the gentle hush of evening. Because even laundry deserves a ceremonial close. You gather your folded garments with a proud sweep of the arm. You leave the courtyard behind, and inside, in the still cool glow of twilight, your favorite evening tunic is waiting patiently on the bench. Tonight, it will be worn, and it will be worthy. You've changed once again, this time into the evening set, the one with the deep plum hue, stitched with silver thread, just barely visible unless you catch the lamplight at the right angle. The sleeves are long, but not cumbersome. The fabric has weight, the good kind, the kind that says, yes, I'm winding down, but I'm doing so deliberately, because Ottoman evenings weren't just dark hours between tea and bed. They were events in themselves, small, serene rituals played out in living rooms, courtyards, or rooftop terraces, each framed by the gentle rustle of sleepwear and the scent of spiced incense curling through the air. You light your favorite lantern, the one with the slightly crooked handle and the colored glass that makes the room glow like a faded mosaic. Then you set the table, not for dinner, not really, just a tray. Figs, a few cubes of cheese, some toasted flatbread, torn into sleepy little triangles. Oh, and a saucer of warm molasses water, because you are an empire of contradictions. Outside, the sky darkens into a thick indigo, like fresh-dyed wool. Inside, everything softens, and it's here, in the hush before true night, that Ottoman pajama culture becomes most visible. This is when the evening robes appear. You sit with your tray and remember an old gathering, your uncle's winter salon, where guests showed up in embroidered robes that could rival a wedding party. Every cushion was taken. The room smelled of cinnamon and cardamom, and everyone casually reclined like the world's most theatrical nap troupe. And yet, somehow, no one looked out of place. One woman wore a burgundy pajama robe that sparkled subtly. When asked if it was too much, she smiled and said, "It's not sleepwear, darling. It's pre-dream couture." Historians still argue whether these evening ensembles were technically considered pajamas or loungewear. The truth is, they were both, and neither. They occupied a liminal space designed for comfort, intended for visibility. Guests might drop by unexpectedly, so you had to look presentable but not too formal. A balance between, I respect your company, and I was about to nap. This was an art. And like all Ottoman arts, it came with rules. Rule 1: silk is encouraged, but not required. Rule 2: embroidery must whisper, not shout. Rule 3: always pair your robe with clean slippers. No exceptions. You glance at your own slippers, simple brown leather, soft enough to fold, but strong enough to tap meaningfully if you need to signal impatience across a room. They've served you well tonight. You shift on your cushion, adjusting the fall of your robe, and think about how the Ottomans valued transitional clothing. Pajamas weren't binary. They weren't just on or off. They evolved with the hour. Morning robes were for movement. Afternoon tunics were for softness. Evening sets were for elegance without edge. And then, of course, came the night layers. But we'll get to that. For now, you sip your molasses water and let your fingers trail along the embroidered hem of your sleeve. Tiny vine patterns, grape leaves, and curling tendrils, said to symbolize patience, ripening, and generosity. You didn't choose it by accident. No one ever does. Your grandmother once told you that she had a robe stitched with peacock feathers down the side, not because she was vain, though. Let's be honest, she was, but because the peacock was said to keep nightmares away. Did it work? She always claimed it did, but she also kept a lemon under her pillow. So, who's to say? You finish your snack, wipe your hands with a soft linen cloth, and lean back into the cushions. The room glows. The air feels syrupy with quiet. You think of neighbors doing the same, some reading poetry, others gently playing the Audi, some just gazing out their windows at the slow swirl of city life dimming around them. A nearby minaret glows gold for a moment, then fades. And somewhere, you're sure, another robe is being selected, a deeper color, perhaps, maybe even velvet. Because as evening slides into night, the final pajama form appears, the bed set, but not just yet. For now, you're wrapped in the last layer of wakeful softness, still alert enough to enjoy the textures, still seated, still sipping. Your robe, plumb with silver thread, settles like a sigh, and all across the empire, others are doing the same, wearing softness like its armor, reclining with pride, and showing the world that even winding down can be an act of style. The tray has been cleared, the last of the molasses water sipped, and your evening robe folded with the reverence due a garment that carried you through so many dignified lounge poses. You ease onto the bed firm, but forgiving, with cotton-stuffed cushions carefully arranged, and reach for the final layer of the night, your true sleep set. This one's softer, lighter. It breathes in the way only well-worn linen can. A faded blue, trimmed with barely there stitching, a relic of your younger days and your finest sleep. You slip into it like a secret. The fabric hugs gently, as if remembering the curve of your shoulders. Your nightcap rests beside your pillow, waiting for its turn. But first, a little bedtime routine, because even in the Ottoman Empire, a proper wind-down required more than just yawning and collapsing. You reach for the jar of balm on your side table, lavender and frankincense, whipped to a cloud, a single dab at the wrists, a second at the temples. You rub it in slow, circular motions. There is no rush here. The world has already begun to dim. In the hallway beyond your door, you hear the faint clink of a teacup being washed. A neighbor's sandals scuff along the garden path. Someone coughs politely, and then nothing. The city has begun its descent, but your mind lingers briefly on something more obscure, something you read once, in a dusty volume at a bookseller's stall in Edirne, a treatise on sleep and health by a 17th century physician named Yusuf bin Asad. In it, he insisted that the body must be wrapped in kindness to rest well. Clothe it as you would a guest. He wrote, and it will reward you with peace. You loved that. Historians still argue whether this was metaphor or literal advice. But considering that the same treatise included a chapter on matching pajamas to dream intention, it's fair to say Yusuf meant both. Tonight, your sleepwear matches your wish for stillness. The loose drawstring at the waist feels secure, but not restrictive. The sleeve hems brush your wrists just enough to be noticed, not enough to distract. You tug the neckline slightly to one side, yes. This is better. You adjust the covers. You turn once, then again, because you always do. Then comes the nightcap. You place it atop your head with exaggerated ceremony because, let's be honest, the ritual of donning it feels like the final act in a one-person play. A soft finale. Your cue to bow out, and just before you blow out the lamp, you recall the tale of the three sleepers of Galata, not a myth, not exactly, but a well-circulated story among certain circles. They were three friends, a poet, a merchant, and a baker, who once claimed they had crafted the perfect coordinated pajama sets to induce synchronized dreaming. Matching fabrics, coordinated scent sachets sewn into the seams. They slept side by side for 1 week, hoping to meet in the same dream. Did it work? Of course not. But the baker did report dreaming of figs every night, which he took as a win. You smile at the thought, the lengths people will go to for rest, the seriousness with which this culture approached even the smallest of nighttime details. You think of the servants carefully folding tunics before first light, of tailors sewing inner linings that would never be seen, of the city, shaped not just by its waking beauty, but by how deliberately it invited slumber. Your own sleepwear, though humble, is a part of that history. You lie back now, the pillow cool and yielding beneath your cheek, the room dim, the lamp flickering lower. Outside, the world sighs, a night breeze rustles the fig tree. A window creaks open. A muffled lullaby floats across the alleyway, sung more out of habit than audience. You close your eyes, and in your perfectly chosen sleep tunic, with its faint floral motif and the hem your cousin stitched, you wait for the first dream to arrive, wrapped, of course, in something stitched with intention. The night deepens, and the city settles like a blanket across itself. The sounds have thinned into a delicate hush, the occasional clink of pottery being set to dry, the distant shuffle of a guard's sandals along the cobbled road, and the soft hoot of an owl who clearly takes its night shift more seriously than most. You're still awake, not restlessly, just gently floating in that dreamy vestibule between awareness and sleep. The cotton lining of your sleep tunic has warmed to your body now. The fibers have relaxed. So have you. And then you remember your dream sachet tucked beneath your pillow. It's a little pouch, no larger than a child's hand, sewn from leftover fabric and filled with crushed herbs, lavender, mostly a pinch of chamomile, and just a whisper of cardamom, because too much. And it starts smelling like a bakery, and you've already brushed your teeth. You pluck it from its hiding spot. Armbekenier. And sinning dimban tonsin and chin brother tenor. A she. Fenainer. Your she dunner. Not too deeply, just enough for the nose to register. Calm, softness, a hint of nostalgia. In Ottoman homes, dream sachets were a quiet tradition. Some practical, some spiritual, all deeply personal. Your grandmother swore by hers, though she changed the contents based on the season. In winter, cloves, rosemary, dried orange peel. In summer, mint, rose, Dorinchan, and crushed pearl barley. For some reason, historians still argue whether these sachets were medicinal, mystical, or simply ritualistic. But surviving pillowcases from the 18th century often include stitched compartments at the seams, designed to hold something small and scented just in case. You return your sachet to its nook beneath the pillow and shift again. Curling onto your side, your robe bunches slightly at the hip comfortably, like a dog curling at your feet. The air has cooled now. You reach for the blanket, a soft, lightweight quilt made from hand-stitched panels. Its top square is a deep green, threaded with old motifs. Birds and tulips. You pull it up to your chest, tug it beneath your chin. You are, for all intents and purposes, a cocoon. In wealthier Ottoman homes, bedding was an art unto itself. Quilts stitched with silk thread, mattress layers adjusted with the seasons, pillows plumped with goose down, or, for the less fortunate, seed husks slightly crinkly, but dependable. Your own pillow falls somewhere in between. It has a memory of your head that's gently held from years of repeated pressure and the occasional midnight monologue muttered into its fabric. You yawn, just a small one, but it unspools through your body like a ribbon. You think of others doing the same, hundreds, maybe thousands, curled in their own cozy layers across the empire, in grand palaces with gold leaf ceilings, in humble homes with cracked shutters, all dressed in variations of the same sleep uniform. Soft fabric, tied loose, smelling faintly of lavender, or soap, or whatever the last meal of the day happened to be. A society unified, not by conquest or coin, but by collective drowsiness. You recall a passage you once read from a traveling French ambassador who visited Constantinople in the 17th century. He wrote, perhaps with a hint of envy, even in their sleep, they appear adorned. He was referring, no doubt, to the quiet elegance of Ottoman sleepwear, and perhaps also to how natural it seemed for people to drift off mid-sentence, mid-lounge, mid-argument even, without anyone blinking an eye. Nap interruptions were never taken personally. It was just understood, a kind of communal pact. If your robe is soft, your voice low, and your intentions clear, the dream realm will make space for you. You begin to drift now, thoughts slow, like stepping stones stretching farther apart across a river. You reach for the lamp now, only a glow, and extinguish it with a single puff. The room responds instantly. Shadows stretch, corners deepen, the glow fades to nothing, but your sleep tunic, your nightcap, and your neatly arranged blanket remain, guarding you, guiding you, and somewhere beyond your window, across the quiet, sleeping sprawl of rooftops and domes and tiled courtyards, a nightbird sings again, one long, reedy note, a lullaby with feathers. You shift once more, nestle deeper into your cushion. The dream sachet releases another faint wave of comfort, and, like thousands before you, dressed in layers of warmth and care, you finally let go. Wrapped in history and cotton, you wake before the sun does barely. A whisper of silver light peeks through the latticed shutters, painting long, delicate stripes across your floor. The call to prayer hasn't begun yet, but you know it's coming. The air is still cool, still wrapped in night, and for now, you're somewhere between slumber and full consciousness. But your pajamas are doing most of the work. They've molded to you overnight, wrinkled in all the right places, softened with your warmth, and the pillowcase is slightly damp. Where your cheek pressed too long against the cotton, nothing dramatic, just evidence of proper dreaming. You stretch, a long, lazy, full body stretch. One leg kicks free from the blanket. Your nightcap slides just slightly askew, like a sleeping bird, tilting its head to look at you sideways. You don't sit up just yet. No. First comes the listening, because the Ottoman morning doesn't arrive all at once. It unfurls outside your window. You hear it, a street sweeper brushing gently against the stone, the creak of a gate, a cockerel not yours, but you know him by name, because he never waits for permission to start the day. A kettle whistles in the neighbor's kitchen. Still, you linger in bed a little longer, eyes closed. You feel the weight of your robe pooled near your knees. It smells, faintly, of the herbs you tucked into your dream sachet. That sachet, by the way, is still beneath your pillow. Flattened now, a quiet veteran of last night's sleep campaign. You begin to rise, slowly. No need to rush. That's the benefit of pajamas that double as morning wear. You don't need to change immediately. The robe you wore to bed is presentable enough for the first hour. The slippers, already waiting near the foot of the bedding. Accept your feet like long-lost friends. You shuffle to the basin, splash cool water on your face. Not a full wash yet, that comes later. In the courtyard, or perhaps the hammam. If you're feeling ambitious, but enough to blink the dreams away. The robe absorbs a few drops from your wrist. No matter, it's earned that little damp spot. You sip warm water simple, clear, touched with the memory of copper from the kettle. And now you begin your slow transition, because while Ottoman culture prized comfort, it also understood the sacredness of morning ritual. Even if you were in your sleepwear, there was structure. The first prayer, the lighting of a lamp, the folding of your sleep blanket, the tucking of your pillow under its protective wrap, the careful refolding of the tunic you wore. Some families had an entire chest dedicated to morning robes more decorative, slightly heavier than sleep tunics, but still a far cry from real clothes. They marked the shift from private night to semi-private morning. Historians still argue whether these garments should be classified as ceremonial or functional. Some describe them as vanity, others as pragmatic layering. They were both, because what could be more ceremonial than dressing to greet the day with gentleness? You change slowly into a new robe. It's a soft tan cotton, with a sash that never quite ties the same way twice. You love it for that. It behaves more like a companion than a garment. It doesn't dictate how you wear it. It waits to see what you need. Today, you loop the sash loosely. Let one side drape longer than the other. A poetic asymmetry. Your slippers remain the same, because even empires can only afford so many well-fitted house shoes. You step out into the courtyard. The stones are cold, but not sharp. You feel grounded by their texture. Overhead, the sky is finally beginning to show its first blue. A sleepy sort of blue, like watered-down ink. You sit beside a small fig tree yours, though you suspect your neighbor feeds it more regularly. Still, it gives shade, and shade is worth its weight in fruit. You sip a second cup of water. The city is waking, slowly, softly. And you, dressed in fabric that remembers sleep but welcomes light, are part of it. You think of the thousands of others across domed cities, along riverbanks, on sun-dappled balconies, doing the same, waking in cotton, moving through linen, greeting the world, one loose sleeve at a time. By now, the sun is high enough to sneak golden fingers through the lattice and touch the back of your neck with an almost flirtatious warmth. You shift on your cushion in the courtyard, draw the edge of your robe closer around your shoulder, and watch the light slowly stretch across the tiles like a silk ribbon unfurling itself. It's nearly time to dress for the day, but not yet. Because this little sliver of morning, when the world is technically awake, but still pretending otherwise, is when something delightful used to happen in Ottoman households. Pajama flirtation. Yes, you heard that right. Back in the day, there was a whole language of affection hidden in folds of sleepwear, a gesture of hospitality here, a whispered compliment about stitching there, a deliberately chosen color that said far more than words ever could. If you knew what to look for, you could see the entire courtship game unfold in softly padded footsteps and embroidered hems. And you were once a pro at it. You remember the jasmine-colored tunic you wore one morning, carefully wrinkled in the sleeves, suggesting you'd slept well, with just enough looseness in the collar to imply casual vulnerability. When the neighbor's cousin came by with breakfast pastries, he noticed the hem stitching is new, he said. Not looking at your face, you offered him tea. Nothing else needed to be said. Historians still argue whether Ottoman pajamas played an intentional role in romantic signaling, or if these were happy coincidences amplified by poets with too much free time. But when one reads the love letters of the period, the ones mentioning the robe I saw you wear when you poured the third glass of tea, or your slippers, mismatched. But honest, it's hard to ignore the evidence. Sleepwear didn't just cradle the body, it sent messages. And when two people were in tune, well, entire relationships bloomed before anyone officially changed into their daytime clothes. There were rules, of course, unspoken, but fiercely obeyed. For instance, overly ornate pajamas in front of someone you weren't courting. Rude, a too casual tunic at a family breakfast where a potential suitor was present. Disrespectful to the tunic. Mostly, even the way you tied your sash carried meaning. A double knot implied self-sufficiency. A loop left slightly askew suggested openness, or possibly poor motor skills. Context was everything, and don't get started on slippers. In the Ottoman tradition, slippers were not just functional, they were emotional. Gifting someone a pair, intimate. Borrowing a pair, scandalous. Arriving unannounced, wearing someone else's slippers. That was a proposal, whether you intended it or not. You smile at the memory of your uncle, who once showed up at the family villa in a pair of red velvet slippers embroidered with lilies. Not mine, he said, but I'm hoping they will be. Reader, they eventually were. You sip your tea, letting the rim of the cup rest on your bottom lip for a moment longer than necessary. You glance at your robe mid-weight, soft gray, with subtle stitching at the wrist. Nothing too forward, but certainly not invisible. And then, from across the courtyard, a familiar face passes by. They pause, smile, nod. You return the smile just enough to say, I see you. Then you glance down and adjust your sash, just slightly. A conversation conducted in cloth. You wonder how many such stories played out across this empire, in palace chambers where silken robes shimmered under lamplight, in stone homes where couples matched their pajamas without ever admitting they did, in hammams, gardens, markets anywhere. Softness and proximity made room for curiosity. And you wonder what your own robes say about you now. Comfortable, yes, but also thoughtful. And yes, a little flirtatious when the moment's right. You take another sip, press your hands to your lap, and lean back on the cushion. The moment is past, but the fabric remembers. It always does. That's the thing about Ottoman pajamas. They weren't just garments. They were participants, witnesses, co-conspirators in the slow dance between affection and modesty. You stand now, the robe falling neatly into place. No rush. There's still time before you change into your full daytime attire. But even as you step back indoors, you walk a little lighter, because sometimes the most meaningful things are said in the spaces between words and the folds between seams. You finally return indoors, passing through a patch of morning light that strikes your robe just right, turning even its modest weave into something quietly luxurious. You pause, letting the warmth wash over you. Then, with the slow grace of someone who has spent their life respecting the moment between comfort and action, you begin to change. Today calls for real clothes, you know, the kind meant for errands, conversations, and maybe a trip to the spice market to argue about cinnamon. But first, the robe must be folded. You do this slowly, with the care of someone folding a memory. Sleeve in, hem tucked, a gentle pat at the collar to say thank you. It's laid on the cedar bench to rest until tonight, or possibly later this afternoon, depending on how ambitious your errands truly get. Your day wear is functional, respectable, but already you're counting the hours until your pajamas can reclaim their throne. And speaking of thrones, let's talk about pajamas as economy. Because as lovely as Ottoman sleepwear was, in function and form, it was also a thriving business. You step into the front room of your home, really more of a shop front, if we're honest, where bolts of cotton and bundles of silken thread are neatly stacked. You inherited this little trade from your father, who inherited it from his aunt, a woman whose embroidery was so respected that even the palace laundresses asked for tips. You sell pajamas. You always have. And apparently, you always will. Your best sellers: lightweight cotton sleep tunics with floral edging, loose lounging trousers with hidden pockets for dreams or almonds. Who's to say? And that one particular robe with the cloud gray panel everyone swears helps them fall asleep faster. Even the local magistrate owns 3. It's a humble business, but a steady one. And if history is to be believed, you're part of a much larger legacy. The Ottoman Empire, after all, was home to thousands of artisans, tailors, and textile workers who kept the population draped in dream-ready attire. Tailor guilds operated in nearly every major city, each with their own secret techniques, their own preferred fabric suppliers, and of course, their own opinions about which embroidery patterns were appropriate for sleep and which were too stimulating. You once heard of a robe stitched entirely with prancing goats. Beautiful work. No one could sleep in it. The markets thrived on these debates. Merchants carried bolts of sleep-appropriate fabric from across the empire. Egyptian cotton, bursa silk, even wool from the highlands that was somehow both breathable and cuddly. Each merchant had their pitch, and each buyer had their quirks. Historians still argue whether there were formal distinctions between day robes and sleep robes in trade ledgers. Some documents suggest a strict taxonomy, while others reveal a charming chaos, where everything not armor or underpants was filed under comfortable stuff. You've seen ledgers yourself. During a visit to Istanbul's market archives, one seller logged 47 robes of rest, 18 slumber tunics, and, curiously, 4 questionably soft sashes. No follow-up notes. There were trends, she too. During the tulip era, everyone suddenly wanted pajamas printed with flowers, not stylized ones, realistic ones. Tulip-accurate petals, botanically plausible stems. During a particularly rainy spring in Edirne, rainproof sleep cloaks briefly became fashionable. You still have one. It crinkles, loudly, but for all the trends, one thing never changed. People wanted their nightwear to feel like home. You recall customers trying on tunics and exhaling, not because they looked beautiful, though they did, but because they felt held. That's the true measure of a good pajama, and a lucrative one. Because the Ottoman pajama economy wasn't just about trade, it was about trust. If a merchant sold you scratchy trousers, you didn't just lose sleep, you lost faith. In fabric, in stitching, in comfort itself. Word spread fast. You learned this early, after a rush shipment of linen pants led to an entire hammam's worth of complaints. You apologized with candied walnuts and free tailoring. Some even returned. One didn't. His robe, legend says, was so itchy it developed a personality. Lesson learned. Now, every stitch is checked, every seam tested. You even whispered to the fabric sometimes. Just encouragement. You've got this, you say, smoothing out a new cuff. And when a customer tries on a robe, twirls, and sighs, that's currency. That's empire. That's the business of pajamas. It's late afternoon now. The market heat has mellowed. The shade stretches farther down the street. And your robe, yes, the one you changed into after your customer left, is already working overtime. You sip a second glass of rosewater tea and lean against the cool stone of your garden wall. Your slippers are off. Your toes enjoy the freedom. But you're not just resting. You're remembering. Because some of the richest stories in Ottoman pajama history didn't take place in bedrooms or tailor shops, but in sick rooms. Yes, truly. There's a long, oddly comforting tradition of pajamas being used not just for rest, but for healing. And not just the emotional kind you get from a well-folded tunic, or the therapeutic qualities of flannel, which, by the way, wasn't popular in the empire. Too warm, too European, too itchy accountant. As one noble reportedly said, we're talking real, doctor-prescribed sleepwear. You see, Ottoman medicine, blending Persian, Arabic, Byzantine, and local Anatolian knowledge, believes strongly in environment-based healing. The room, the light, the airflow, the sounds, even the garments touching the skin were all part of the wellness equation. So when someone fell ill, whether with a fever or melancholy, or even just a particularly stubborn headache, the first question wasn't, what medicine shall we give them? It was, what robe are they wearing? You once saw a physician's notes from the 18th century beautiful script, very loopy, recommending a loose robe in muted blues, embroidered with calming motifs and no rough seams under the armpits. This, paired with mint water and a talisman tucked under the pillow, was the full treatment plan. Historians still argue whether this attention to pajamas was symbolic, medical, or just a bit of cultural pampering. But when you lie sick in bed, wearing something soft that smells faintly of lavender and family, you don't care. It works. Some healers even stitch charms into the robe, hymns, tiny phrases, prayers, or symbols of protection. These weren't always visible. You had to know where to look. A single stitch in red, or a slightly uneven tulip petal, or 3 knots tied just under the shoulder seam. One such charm read, "May your breath be light and your dreams quiet." You stitched it yourself once. For a cousin, he got better. Blamed the tea. You credited the robe. And it wasn't just doctors. Families participated too. If someone in the household fell ill, the finest sleepwear was brought out. Not for vanity, for care, for love. You wrap the person you love in your softest fabric. That was the logic. Still is, really. There's an old saying, what your hands can't heal, your cotton might. You've seen it. When your neighbor's child had a fever, she didn't call for medicine first. She called for the cedar box, the one with the pajama set embroidered in golden wheat, passed down 3 generations, soft from use, sacred from memory. And when the child recovered, the robe was refolded, kissed, and returned to the cedar's shadows. You wonder if modern medicine lost something in its quest for sterility. You're not anti-science. Far from it. You just believe in fabric and softness and the way a robe can anchor the soul while the body figures itself out. You glance down at the robe you're wearing now. Lightweight cotton, double-stitched, with a subtle pomegranate motif. You chose it today because it felt steady, not dramatic, not frivolous, just right. And you remember a story about an Ottoman soldier who returned from a long campaign His legs were strong, his mind alert, but he couldn't sleep. For weeks, finally, his mother laid him down, wrapped him in the robe he wore as a child, frayed sleeves, patched elbow, smelled faintly of mint and ink. He slept for 2 days straight, woke up smiling, said nothing, but kept the robe. You run your hand along your own sleeve now, tracing the seams. There's no fever in your body, no wound to mend, but the robe still heals in its own way, quietly, softly, patiently. Evening slides over the city like a silk veil, and once again, your daywear has earned its retirement. You've changed slowly, ceremonially, back into your twilight robe, the one you wear not to impress or to nap, but to sit, to exist, to be quietly present while the empire fades into candlelight. Tonight, it's the robe, with the deep indigo panels and the tiny stitched tulips along the hem. You wear it because it feels like dusk. And because the neighbor's aunt is hosting a poetry reading, it's not formal. Mind you, just a handful of friends gathered in the courtyard beneath grapevines, sipping tea and mispronouncing metaphors. But even so, you've chosen your robe carefully. It's comfortable, yes, but also dignified. The way soft suede slippers can still tap out a rhythm when someone recites something especially good. You make your way down the stone path, the evening air brushing your sleeves like a cat weaving between your legs. The lanterns are already lit, amber pools of warmth bobbing along the balconies. Someone has lit clove incense. Someone else has begun strumming a saz far too early. Classic, and there they are. Half a dozen figures draped in every type of bedtime chic imaginable. There's Salim in a gold-threaded robe that looks like he ironed it with a prayer. Fatma in her usual mismatched brilliance. Lemon-yellow tunic with scarlet cuffs. Even the baker's son, clearly wearing his father's too long robe, sleeves rolled twice and still flopping into his tea. You greet them all with the sleepy elegance of someone who spent the entire day in fabrics designed to teach the body how to rest. And you take your seat. There's no hierarchy here. You could be a merchant or a mystic, a weaver or a water seller. Tonight, you're just a listener, wrapped in something that knows how to hold you still. Someone begins to read a ghazal about longing and rivers, and possibly soup, depending on your interpretation. You smile, not at the poem exactly, but at the rustling sound of a dozen robes shifting to get comfortable. Pajamas were made for this, and as the verses roll on, you think about how many evenings like this have passed in this city. How many soft-robed gatherings, how many dreams shared over stewed quince and second-hand poetry. Historians still argue whether these twilight salons were true literary events or just excuses to socialize in fancy pajamas. But if you've ever reclined against a cushion, fig in hand, while someone earnestly compares moonlight to goat's milk, you know, it doesn't matter. The robe matters. The pause. The warmth in your sleeve when your teacup nestles just right into the crook of your elbow. Halfway through the reading, someone passes you a plate of honeyed walnuts. They stick slightly to your fingers. You wipe them on the inside hem of your robe without guilt. That's what it's for. You lean back, watching shadows climb the courtyard walls like they've done for centuries. Your robe folding gently over your lap like a soft exhale. There's a small breeze now. Your sleeves flutter. Someone yawns, and it spreads through the group like gossip. No one leaves yet. The last poem is read, the last fig halved, the last candle trimmed, and slowly, like a curtain falling at the end of a play no one wanted to end, the gathering disperses. You walk home, barefoot, slippers tucked under your arm. You feel the stone beneath your feet. You feel the robe swish with every step, and you wonder how many evenings across this empire have ended this way, with people full of warmth, words, and a little powdered sugar in their sleeves. You reach your doorway, open it, step inside, and know deep in your rested bones that you'll remember tonight not for the rhymes or the walnuts, but for how your robe felt when you laughed. The hour is late now. You've washed your hands with rose-scented water, dabbed your face with a cool cloth, and folded your indigo evening robe with the quiet ceremony it deserves. A whisper of cardamom still clings to the cuffs, a tiny echo of the poetry gathering, and you smile as you tuck it back into the cedar chest. Now it's time for your final attire, your true nightwear, the robe you only wear when the world is done asking things of you. It's simple, as always, worn to a softness that no loom could replicate. A faint gray, with loose sleeves and a neckline stretched ever so slightly from a decade of adjusting it just so. The kind of robe that doesn't just fit, it understands. And you slip into it like dusk into night. There's a rhythm to these final moments. You check the shutters latched. You set the lamp wick just low enough to watch it flicker out. You fluff the pillow, adjust the blanket's corner. You do all of it slowly, like reciting a bedtime poem in movement. And somewhere in the city, the last bakers are cooling their ovens. The last ferries are mooring at the edge of the Bosphorus. The domes gleam faintly under the stars, and 1,000 other robes rustle quietly as people all across the empire prepare to sleep. Tonight, you think, was a good day for pajamas. But it's not just about fabric and fit. It's the culture they carry, the etiquette they teach, the tiny, silent ways Ottoman sleepwear shaped human connection, from flirtation to healing to hospitality. You think about the stories passed through folds and hems, the embroidered secrets, the sachets tucked into seams, the way elders knew exactly which robe to lend a guest after a bath, the way a child's first sleep tunic was considered a rite of passage, the way you can still tell which district someone's from by the way they double knot their sash. Historians still argue whether the empire truly had a pajama code, as some romantic scholars insist, or if it was just a social coincidence born of shared space and climate. But every time you see someone smooth the front of their robe before speaking, you know it was deliberate. And you followed every unspoken rule tonight. Slippers off before bed, robe folded with care, sleep tunic chosen not for trend, but for comfort. You lie back into the mattress, which gives a gentle sigh beneath you, the cotton sheet cool against your arms. The final lantern winks out, leaving the room lit only by moon memory and imagination. Your nightcap is already on, tilted slightly, but with conviction. You pull the blanket up. You nestle your cheek into the pillow's familiar dip. And just before sleep fully takes you, your mind drifts to one last odd tale, the case of the wandering robe, a story told by weavers' apprentices in Bursa about a robe so perfectly soft, so sublimely tailored, it refused to stay with any one person. Whoever wore it would dream too deeply, too sweetly, and the next day, the robe would vanish carried by wind, rumor, or its own quiet will to someone new in need of rest. You wonder where it is now, maybe hanging behind a door in Damascus, maybe folded in a cedar chest in Sarajevo, maybe on its way to you. You yawn, the kind of yawn that unties all the knots in your thoughts, and as your limbs go heavy, your breath goes slow, and your robe wraps gently around your ribcage like a lullaby made of thread. You let yourself fall, not because the day was exhausting, but because this moment the robe, the room, the quiet was made for sleep. Sleep has taken its place beside you, not with a crash, but with the gentle certainty of a silk scarf falling across a chair. Your breath has slowed. Your limbs have long since melted into the mattress. And still, your robe holds you not tight, Not heavy, just enough to remind you that even in dreams, you are wrapped in care. You dream of gardens now, not extravagant, not imagined, just the courtyard from earlier in the day. But quieter, the fig tree hums softly in the breeze, its leaves silvery on the underside, flutter like hands waving a slow goodbye to the waking world. And you're there barefoot, as always, robe swaying around your ankles like a low cloud. You walk past cushions still warm from earlier guests. You pick up a teacup you don't remember leaving and sip something floral and forgettable. It tastes like calm. Around you, shadows curl into corners. Lanterns hang like faint memories. No one speaks, but you feel accompanied. And that's the essence of this entire story, isn't it? That sleep, in the Ottoman world, was never just a solo act. It was something communal. You think of the woman 2 alleys over, humming, while folding her husband's robe, of the child reciting her bedtime surah in a tunic 2 sizes too big, of the sailor pulling his woolen sleep shirt over his head, while the ship rocks gently near the Golden Horn. You think of the people whose pajamas weren't made from cotton, but from handed down kindness, the ones whose only softness was a neighbor's spare quilt, the ones who learned to make comfort out of very little folding, and refolding the same tunic until it forgot its stiffness and became a second skin. And still, they slept, and still, they dreamed. You stir slightly now, just enough to tug the blanket a little higher. A breeze tickles the windowsill. Outside, the empire sleeps, quiet, layered, complex, not frozen in history, but gently breathing beneath it. And here you are, wrapped in your final robe of the night, simply, faded, faithful. You'll wear it again tomorrow, and the next day, and the next. Not because it's special, but because somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing pajamas as clothing. You started seeing them as companions, witnesses to your rest, guardians of your softest hours. And tonight, as sleep deepens, you remember something your grandfather used to say as he tied the sash of his robe before bed. No matter how far you walk in your dreams, may your robe still fit when you return. You smile barely. The moon dips behind a roofline. The fig leaves rustle one last time, and the only thing left in this room now is stillness.